I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the leadership journey of our guest and what unique traits bring them to be the leader they are today. Who knows what we're going to discover together, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. I'm delighted to be joined by Jimmy Burroughes today, all the way from the US. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thanks, Paula. So wonderful to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing really good. It's been we're at the culmination of 2 huge months as a team and as a business, and I'm feeling genuinely energized by the work we're doing, and super happy. And also the fact that it's Friday, which means that we're close to the weekend for a bit of sunshine and relaxation.
Oh, fantastic. We're giving away the day that we're recording it as well. But that's no problem at all. It's super exciting to be almost at 5 o'clock somewhere, as the saying goes, where we get to relax and put our feet up and see the fruits of our labour from the week, as it were. But been a super busy couple of months here as well. Exciting times helping teams reach the goals and the sort of results that they really set for themselves.
Amazing. Good work. Well done. And it's important work as well. So yeah, thrilled for you.
Absolutely. Now, let me just give an official introduction as to who Jimmy is. So Jimmy's an ex-Army officer, MBA grad and former corporate GM, now on a mission to change the way teams work together to increase the bottom line. Now, what a wonderful introduction to what you do, but I love that last bit, work together to increase the bottom line in performance. Now, what a mission, in fact, and how's that really, come about and playing into what you do?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. And it always fascinates me with what people see in the things you write and say that probably we're not offhanded, but we're not given the same level of analysis or rigor that other people see when they ask. So, if I unpack it a little bit, one of the things that most of us who are in the high-performing teams or leadership space are focused on is people-centric stuff. We want people to be able to work with their teams and do great work because it's a nicer place to work, and B, people generally have a better work experience when they go through those circumstances. But the reality of our organizational structures and models that most of us work in, it's about profit and productivity and performance. And so if you work in the people space, I think it's really important to attach and attribute commercial success to the outputs that you're creating. And one of the things that we do extensively in organizations is we are directly return on investment mapping the programs and the initiatives that we run against commercial bottom line performance. So whether it's time spared, productivity, engagement levels, whatever it might be, or whether it's simply we're able to focus on our priorities better to do the things that make a big difference in our business versus on tactical activities. So we're very commercially driven. And I guess that's come from a career having worked in HR, but also a heavy operational career as a GM and various other roles, and now running a business. We're not going to invest in anything that's fluffy and HR-y. We're going to invest in things that are impactful and people-centric. And so we try and attribute everything we do to bottom line.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that we're investing in things that, well, my interpretation, that are going to get results. But of course, when you say people-centric, that does, of course, include, I think you used the word fluffy there, the fluffier side, the softer skills, the understanding what makes people tick, the empathy that goes with that, the kindness, the ability to encourage people to follow you as a leader, for example, and be able to get buy-in from people, all of those kind of softer skills that you can help support people with. But I sometimes think about the natural abilities that come into that as well.
So much value in what you just said there, and the soft skills being the hardest ones to develop, right? And
Absolutely.
the ability to influence and lead and encourage and inspire, and all those what are perceived as fluffy, non-commercial things are
Mm.
actually the things that make the biggest difference to the commercial outcomes. And so I believe that my job, our jobs, is to almost let leaders peek behind the curtain a little bit and see, well, these are the things that maybe you are or maybe you aren't doing. But if we can do more of that, actually, the things you want that you're working really hard for are more likely to happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that sort of partnership that I think I'm hearing coming through there, Jimmy, with your clients, where you're working with them, really working hard to understand what it is they're looking for, what they want to achieve, and then supporting them to understand how best to achieve that is so valuable. I mean, for me, that idea of consultants coming in, delivering something that doesn't quite fit the package and then leaving and hoping it all happens. It's a bit like those training courses that we go on for a couple of hours and it's all great and enthusiastic in the moment, and then 3 days later you've totally forgotten everything.
Yeah, I call it sheep dipping.
Yeah.
It's the way where you literally take people through or the sausage factory leadership program or high performing teams program. And essentially my entire business has grown out of the fact that we believe that stuff doesn't work. And what most people experience on leadership programs and high performing team programs is relatively ineffective and is well meant. There's no disrespect to anybody who's delivering leadership programs and high performing team programs. You're doing good work. The reality is the business context is not ready to receive it. So our jobs is to bridge that and to find a way of saying, well, let's work out what you need for your business in your context and deliver that versus giving you what we have.
Yeah. And it's so interesting as you're talking there. I'm just thinking, in my own experience of courses over the years that I've been on in my 30 years of corporate, is I can't remember much of the content, if I'm brutally honest, apart from the last one that I went on that was accompanied by coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a very different philosophy in terms of the way that it was delivered, what we were trying to achieve, and that real personal growth journey that went with it. And it made such a difference to the transformation for everybody that was in the program, the promotions that came afterwards for people, or the different things they did. Some left and went on to other and bigger and greater things, and it just had such an impact for everybody on the program.
Absolutely. Wrapping that coaching time around the delivered experience. I also believe strongly in the power of reflection and integration. So yes, you might have been taught that content. Sure, that's great. That's 10% of it. The 70% comes from the rubber hitting the road. So you trying it and maybe falling flat on your face and going, well, why did I fall flat on my face? Or maybe it working really well and saying, well, why did it work really well? And how do I do more of that?
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things we try and do is to create those moments, those opportunities during the programs that we work on with clients. So not only are they being in the conversations talking in their context, but also then saying, well, go now away for a couple of weeks and give some of these things that you've said you wanted to do a go. And then let's loop back and talk about how it went. And it might be that we can share some wisdom. Somebody tried something and it didn't work. And somebody say, well, I tried something slightly different and it did work. So now we've got a point of reference. And these are the things we want to try and create. And so whether it's group coaching or individual coaching, I strongly believe in it.
Yeah. I mean, that power of that growth mindset, being able to look at what's just happened, analyze it, understand what went well, as you say, learn from it. How can we do more of that over here? The stuff that didn't go so well, what do we take from that and what do we not do next time as a result, and so on. There's so much power for teams in that, and that really helps to underpin that sort of high performing team, if you like, to succeed.
I completely agree. I couldn't be a stronger advocate for this stuff. And I'll tell a simple story. I posted a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn a poll for where our leaders, senior leadership teams, which is where we tend to work, where are senior leaders spending most of their time? And it was one-on-one meetings, planning meetings, delivery, and reflection and deep thinking. And I was quite shocked that 0% of senior leaders said reflection and deep thinking. They're not doing it. They're often stuck in the planning and deliver. But when do you take the moment to think about, was that thing we delivered actually the right thing to be doing? Or what was the purpose of that? Did we get a great outcome from that? And also, what's the next thing that we should probably deliver versus just doing all the things, which is what most leadership teams I'm encountering right now. They're just completely overwhelmed with a bazillion priorities. Everything's a priority, so everything has to get done. And that deep reflection and thinking is can I just sort the dots out in my head and untangle the knot that's going on and work out what's the most important thing to be doing next?
Yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I have to say, Jimmy, I'm not surprised that it was 0% in terms of the reflection and the thinking, just because a lot of the people that I support in senior leadership just want a thinking space. They haven't got time to block an hour in their diary just to reflect on the 10 meetings that have already happened by 8:30 this morning, because Asia's awake and we're based in the UK, and they've had to meet with all of them. And then the rest of their team are in the US, so they're then working to 10 o'clock at night to try and cover all of them as well. And, back-to-back meetings with no thinking space in between to understand what just happened. And as you say, untangle that knot of all the actions and who's supposed to be doing what there, and then prepare for the next meeting. What am I going into next? They're just running literally from one thing to the next. So when they come to me, it's like that, oh my goodness me, isn't this lovely? I can just...
Stepping off the hamster wheel for a few minutes.
Absolutely that. So I often call it, instead of coaching, thought partnership, because that's what it is. They're just like, oh, can I run this thing past you? What do you think about this? How could I do that? And obviously most of the time I'm going back with a coaching question because they know the answers. They've got it within them. But it's just that time to think. And I am a big fan of Nancy Klein, I have to say.
I'm 100% in alignment with you, and we do the same thing. We have a leadership sounding board service, which is essentially for executives who just need a bit of space need space held for them to get off the hamster wheel for 45 minutes and just talk something through. Or I'm thinking about doing this, but I don't want to look stupid in front of everybody. What do you think? Or here's my couple of options. What do you reckon? And we just throw that idea and mold it around, pressure test it a little bit, and then hand it back, and they can go and do what they want to with it. But you're right. I recall back, if I go back to my corporate career as a GM, literally, you've just described my life. First meeting started at 7 o'clock. Last meeting finished at 7 o'clock. And every time I moved meetings, there'd be 2 or 3 of my team standing outside with the talking points for the next meeting, or a sandwich or something to sign. And I never had the time to go, so what's this next meeting about? And to really think and prepare. And then we wonder why we're so busy, and we wonder why we're not necessarily performing at our greatest potential, because we're too busy to digest and unpack it.
Absolutely had this conversation with somebody the other day in one of the contracts that I'm part of at the moment, that there's so much more value that I could be adding, but because we're so down in the weeds over here, with the constant meetings and the constant operational stuff that has to get done, what's happening with the strategy piece over here, and that's something that I'm helping to support with, and it's just so interesting. It's so interesting that how many organizations and people are suffering from that as well.
From what I'm seeing, it's almost universal. And so the question in my mind is always, why? Why has this become the new normal?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we might have to have a powwow on that later. Well, what I'm curious about now, of course, because this is your first episode with us, Jimmy, is how you've got to be the great Jimmy that you are today in terms of your sort of, I know, journey. It always feels like an overused word, but I can never think of another word. So what's your story as to how you've ended up where you are now?
You call it a journey. I could probably call it a meander. I'm not sure. Or a chaotic series of events. I don't know.
Do you remember Mr. Messi from the Mr. Men, the pink one that's all like
yes.
squiggle? Yeah. That's mine.
I think mine's Mr. Bump. That's probably
yeah. Love it.
I only learned the hard way, you know. How did I get to here? That's a great question. If we go back to the beginning, so to speak, my first job out of university was a British Army officer. So I went to Sandhurst for a year, got a lot of intensive leadership training. And then when I finished training, I was posted out to Germany. But unfortunately, all of my regiment were over in Iraq fighting the Second Gulf War. So I arrived in Germany on the Thursday, was on a commercial flight to Kuwait City on the Tuesday, and then hitchhiked from Kuwait up to Basra in the back of a pickup truck, and joined the regiment in the tail end of the war. I think we were, if not 48, 72 hours away from George Bush declaring the victory at the start of a 7-year campaign. But the reality was, from a very early age in my career, I was heaped up with leadership training, but also leadership responsibility. So 23-year-old in charge of 30 odd people. And by the time I got to 26, 100 and something people, and in quite high risk scenarios. So we were operating in Iraq and in Afghanistan, doing all sorts of bits and bobs in cities and deserts and the like. But it was a really good insight, because one of the things you do as an army officer is you train your soldiers to take them on operations, and then you take them on operations and lead them on the operations. And so through my army career, I got recognized quite frequently for my ability to deliver high impactful, meaningful training for the soldiers that resulted in great operational performance. And that was one of the sort of themes that stuck with me through my move into the corporate space. So as I left the military, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was pretty good at this training stuff, and I knew I was quite good at organizing things. And I thought, well, I wonder if there's a job like that in Civvy Street. And naturally, I guess, graduated through a couple of jobs, but ended up in the corporate HR space, doing a variety of roles across training and development, organizational development, talent, culture, engagement, and then subsequently talent and recruitment, and running a recruitment function for one of the large banks in New Zealand. And then I suddenly realized that I'd kind of lost that business nous that I thought was important. And if I reflect on what I was trying to achieve, I wanted to be the CEO of an organization. I wanted to get to run a business, because I thought if I run the business, I can impact how the business runs, and I can make a difference to all the people around me. So I was desperately pushing to move up the ranks. And I'd moved from sort of junior management level up to sort of a senior regional role. But I was missing that commercial P&L experience. So I ended up moving from out of HR into a corporate GM experience, which was in a very large organization, running essentially the cash cow business unit of the business, which was an extremely challenging few years of my life. We had a whole series of transformation activities going on. The way we acquired customers, we outsourced our onboarding of new customer model. We changed the way we changed the entire customer lifecycle model. They changed their asset footprint, building new offices and buildings, getting rid of old buildings. Everything was in flux. The executive team was in flux as well. So I had 3 bosses in 18 months. And the final kind of nail in the coffin for me was a legislative change, which ended up with half of our bottom line just disappearing in one decision in 24 hours. And the CEO saying to me, well, Jimmy, you need to find a way of making this work, because we rely on your part of the business to fund the rest of the business, which was at that point running at a considerable loss.
Mm.
And so through my career, I'd also, I guess, always been on the edge of my capability, always pushing performance anxiety and imposter syndrome. I'm younger than most of the people around me. The GM role I had, I was 10 years younger than pretty much everybody else around the table, if not 15 years. And there was always like the young up and coming imposter who was trying to prove themselves, which is probably all in my mind, but it was my reality in that moment. So I just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And unfortunately, in 2017, it got the better of me. And I realized when I woke up one morning, I'm just not sure I can go to work today. I'm not sure I've got it in me anymore. I'm not sure there's any gas left in the tank. And there'd been a long run up to that moment where I'd found myself very, very sleep deprived, sleeping on sort of 4 hours sleep a night because of the workload, because of the sense of needing to deliver, traveling extensively as well with the job. So was always living in hotels or out at hosted dinners, then moving cities that night to be in the next city for the following morning, doing board papers at 3 a.m. because they had to be delivered back to New Zealand before we went into our day of meetings. Very, very sleep deprived. Losing my healthy habits, losing running, losing hobbies, losing downtime, losing time with my now ex-partner, who was also struggling, I guess, with my consumedness of the job. And unfortunately also started to rely on substances to get me through the day. So, lots of caffeine in the morning, some Nurofen to get rid of the headache from the night before, finish the day with a couple of bottles of wine, and was a walking time bomb. And, it came down to the point where I thought, well, if I keep going like this, I'm probably going to have a heart attack or I'm going to drop dead from the stress. And I'm not sure I can keep going. There was no joy in what I was doing. It was constant whack-a-mole, 1 step forward, 2 step backwards. And so just realized that essentially I'd burned out. There was nothing left to give. It was time to stop because I couldn't keep going. And that started what has turned into the last 6 years of my life, which is building a business, a consulting business around helping leaders and teams get off that ledge of I'm burned out, I have to quit. We don't want you to quit. We don't want you to lose your livelihood, to not to be able to pay your mortgage, not to be able to feed your family, and to lose your sense of identity, because most of us wrap our identity and our roles into one. So my job is now, how do we get you and your team away from that sense of, I'm not sure we can do this anymore, we're just done, we're exhausted, back to, wow, Paula's absolutely smashing it out the park and her team is on fire, and we are like, wow, she needs a promotion, she needs a bonus, she needs to be supported and invested in because she's incredible. That's where we want to get you and your team back to. So that's the work we do now, is taking them on the journey of how they do that.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for noticing I'm incredible. That's the first thing to say. Joking. Goodness me. And we'll ask you more about your pivotal moments in the third episode, Jimmy. But what an awakening, because there are so many people that have been through what you've been through, and being able to share that experience and those things that you notice there, like the 4 hours sleep, the relying on the caffeine, relying on the Nurofen to perk you up the next day, the doing ridiculous things like board papers at 3 a.m. I mean, my goodness me, I've been there to a certain extent, but not that extreme. But I can certainly empathise with the pressure, and I think I can only say this for myself, but hopefully this will resonate. I realised that a lot of that pressure was in my own head, that I was holding myself to ridiculous expectations. If this is making sense to you, I can see you nodding. As much as there is this sort of culture that's unhealthy, where there is this perceived expectation, we then, and I know I did this myself, manifest it more in our own head, that we've got to keep up appearances and keep going with this ridiculous schedule and everything else until we suddenly break. Is that making sense to you?
You're so right. You know, one of the things that became very evident when I started doing the research around burnout and the linkages between people who burn out and imposter syndrome, the linkages between people who burn out and performance anxiety, the linkages between people who burn out and the sense of wanting to be successful for whatever reason, because you feel like you should, because you feel like you might be found out, or because you're deeply passionate about what you're doing. They're all gateways to, if you're not careful, to ending up at burnout, because you're the one who goes the extra mile. You're the one who is willing to give up your weekends and your evenings and your time off and your vacation and hobbies and put the family on the back burner because you've got to do that X, Y, or Z that is in the task list. And the people who aren't so motivated, don't care as much, generally have a much lower incidence of burning out. So if there's leaders listening on the call, look around for the people in your team who are your deeply passionate, highly driven, maybe wanting to get promoted members of the team, and they're the ones to keep an eye on. Also, look out for the people who are completely not, like, they used to be good, but they come off the boil, or they're making more mistakes than they used to, or they're taking more sick days than they used to, because again, chances are that they might already be burning out.
Yeah.
And this is not about being tired out or stressed out or worn out. And burnout gets a lot of hashtag press, you know, from, oh, I'm so burned out. It's almost become a badge of honor. Oh, I'm burned out beyond belief.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's when all of those things, stressed out, worn out, tired out, overworked, when they all combine, and you lose hope. Yeah. You lose the ability to actually care or cope. That's when you've got to start paying attention to the danger signs of burnout, because otherwise you can end up in nervous breakdown, having to quit, going beyond. It's almost like gone beyond the point of no return. Our job is to catch you before you get to that point.
Yeah, I love that you're sharing this now, Jimmy, and thank you for putting yourself out there and sharing what it can feel like and those warning signs, because it is that moment that you suddenly realize that everything starts to feel overwhelming, you know, like paying simple things like paying a bill at home will suddenly tip you over the edge, because everything else is piling on top of you. It will just be the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, and it can be the simplest of thing that just makes it happen. And
it often is
so much.
And one of the analogies or metaphors we use is we get people to hold a glass of water out in front of them at arm's length. And as we go around the room, the facilitated room, we just say, oh, can you just hold that glass up for me? Or you just hold that glass up for me. And I just kind of do it almost as a whimsical thing. And it's a small thing for you to do, and I'm just going to keep going in the room. And I just leave them there for 5 to 10 minutes with this glass. And you can see you can see the glass start to fall, and people like reinforcing their arms. And over time, we suddenly look around the room and there's all these people holding these glasses, and there's people really focusing on the pain that their arm is going through to hold this glass up, because I've asked them, I'm a position of authority in that moment. I've said, hey, can you hold the glass up for me? And then you say to them, well, what are we realizing? That it's a glass of water. It's not a very heavy thing to hold. But if you do it for 3 years, then you're going to be thinking of nothing else. Even 10 minutes, you're in pain. After 20 minutes, will you even be paying attention to anything else? And that's the reality of what our teams and our people are operating in right now, is they've been holding glasses of water for 3 years. Whether it's the fear of COVID, the fear of redundancy, the fear of something else that's going on for them. Is my child going to be okay? Is my elderly grandmother going to survive this? Am I going to get made redundant? Am I going to lose my livelihood because there's not many jobs out there right now? We're all living in this constant fear, which is that equivalent of holding this glass of water. How can we possibly have the mental fortitude and capacity to deal with a lack of prioritization, poor decision making, and maybe a lack of resourcing and support in our teams to do a great job when we're worrying about all those other things? And that's the reality of what we're seeing now, I think, is people are overwhelmed by holding lots of small glasses of water for a long period of time and having to do their jobs.
Yeah, it's such a powerful metaphor. As you were saying it totally resonated with me. And I think, being able to help people understand what's going on for them in simple terms is really, really helpful. And that idea of, yes, we are holding all this luggage, baggage, whatever you want to call it, that just doesn't go away unless we do the work to support ourselves and work through it and move forwards. And that it's okay not to be okay for a little while you sort all this stuff out. But, there's lots of people just like you, like me, lots of others that can help support to bring you out the other side. And the fact that you're sitting here now is solid proof that it is possible to be okay again and get your life back together and start to take back that control and make choices for yourselves. That's simply what it comes down to. Because, as much as we think we don't have a choice, I talk about this a lot actually, Jimmy, what often happens is we think we don't have a choice when it's super, super difficult to take the other path. And actually, just because it's really, really hard doesn't mean it might not be the right choice for you. So it's understanding, taking that step back and understanding those choices, what it might take. And yes, it might get a little bit worse before it gets better, but you've got that autonomy to make those choices for yourself. And I
Absolutely.
really, really love being able to help people to do that.
I think you're so right. And it's challenging because when you are burned out, it's really tough to be brave. It's really tough to do anything. Yeah. I remember the days in 2017 where it was, and I use the phrase wading through mental treacle.
Yeah.
But I'm a reasonably sharp and energized person. I don't think I'm incredible, but I think I'm above average intelligence, above average energy, and above average drive. And honestly, it was a struggle to get out of bed.
Mm.
Honestly, it was a struggle to talk to people, to make a decision, to do anything. And so what we encourage is probably two things, actually. Number one is to write a list of, and we have people do this in sessions, write a list of what do you look like when you're working at 80% of your capacity and below. So what are you, how are you behaving? How are you speaking? How are you feeling? And write the same list of when you're 100% or more. How are you behaving? How are you speaking? How are you feeling? So you've got the comparison, because with the best will in the world, burnout tends to creep up on you and you don't see it coming until you're in it. And then if you're really in it, it's like quicksand. It's very hard to get out of. So what we encourage people to do is be much more mindful and aware of what is going on for them before they get to the 100%. So they go, oh, okay, I'm starting to see some of those things that are on my list in the 100% plus column. Need to be careful right now. Need to make sure I'm getting myself back to the 80% column. We also have those leaders, if they're senior leaders, we have them share them as a leadership team. So they start to watch out for each other in terms of some of the warning signs. But the key piece is being brave enough, as you said, to make that choice, to make that change. And for me, it was literally leaving, to all intents and purposes, from the outside in, looked like an extremely wonderful life. I had the waterfront house with 6 bedrooms and swimming pool and Range Rover and sports car and this wonderful holidays all the time and beautiful things in the house. And I was utterly miserable, and I let go of all of it because I wanted a simple life living on the beach in Mexico. So the bravery came from going, well, actually, all those trappings of perceived success are not, they're almost like shackles keeping me in this job that makes me miserable, keeping me burning out, keeping me on this slippery slope to potential mental health issues and ruin. And being brave enough to let go of that and make some conscious changes. And obviously that bravery looks different for every person in their context. And we're not suggesting you sell everything and move to Mexico. That's not necessarily the right answer for you. But whatever it is that you're doing that is making you feel trapped in your current existence, it's being brave enough to say, well, am I willing to let that go, to let go of some of this pressure?
Yeah. I love that. And it is that uniqueness in each and every one of us. So whatever that tipping point is for me will be different for you. You're absolutely right. We're all unique, and we all will have that different catalyst that makes us suddenly go, actually, this isn't okay anymore. I need to do something before I can't.
Yep, absolutely. And do you know the secret that I found out, having done the sell everything and move to Mexico to live by the beach, is actually you can get back to a better place than you were before if you're working in your zone of passion and purpose than if you're working because you're trapped in an existence that makes you unhappy.
And now you're talking my language of purpose, which is just one of my favorite things to talk about. But I'm just conscious that we have recorded a really long session here, which is fascinating because I'm just really enjoying talking to you, Jimmy. But we've got another 2 with you, which is really, really fabulous. Feel very lucky to have had you come on and join us. And my goodness me, we've talked about all sorts so far, and this is only episode 1 with you, Jimmy. So thank you so much for just really opening up, sharing your wonderful wisdom with us already. There is so much in there that's going to be so helpful to so many of our listeners in whatever their shape or form their leadership journey takes. So I am already super excited to talk to you next week, because you'll come back and join us and give us your take on game and leadership. And then, of course, your 3rd episode with us will be on your pivotal moments. So we may well dig a bit more into what we've just been talking about in terms of your story so far. So thank you so much for today. And I can't wait to see you next week.
Speak to you then. Take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. Today, we listen to the leadership journey of our guest and how they got to be where they are today. Now, in the chats, we talked about all sorts of different things, and there are lots of bits and pieces in there that are going to mean something different to each and every one of you. You'll all have your own unique takeaways, so I encourage you to do a bit of reflection now and see what this might mean for your leadership moving forwards. I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and I look forward to seeing you on Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders, next week. Bye for now.